Well, today's YouTube presentation is both historical and relevant. So why is the Eureka Rebellion, relevant 170 years after the revolt occurred on the 3rd of December 1854? Now there's plays being written about the Eureka Rebellion, books, films, poems, and it continues to be a so-called contested history. Well, there's no such thing as contested history. It's about interpretation. And today I'm going to give you an interpretation that most likely you haven't heard before, because it's about reclaiming the radical spirit of the Eureka Rebellion. So the different strains are that it was a revolt by small business people. That's right. That's what the conservative reactionary elements in society will tell you. A revolt by small business people. Other people claim it was some type of racial riot. You've got white supremacists taking on the Eureka Rebellion as their rebellion. Then you've got other people talking about that it was a rebellion basically about taxation, and it didn't go any further. So what I'm going to do today is look at the background, look at the history, and then look at its relevance to 21st century society. Although the Eureka Rebellion occurred on the 3rd of December 1854, the reason for the rebellion stretched back to 1835, when John Batman in the Free Enterprise crossed the Bass Strait from Tasmania and illegally set up a settlement where Melbourne is today. So what's that got to do with the Eureka Rebellion almost 20 years later? Simple. Initially, Victoria was part and parcel of New South Wales. The reason Faulkner, Batman and his crew came to Melbourne was to make their fortune. When Hume and Hovell travelled in the 1830s from Sydney to Portland, they came across what they described as vast grazing lands. Now these grazing lands were there as a result of 60 years of agricultural management or forest management by local people. At the same time, what we had is the Industrial Revolution in England and Scotland and Wales. When the commons were closed, the commons were actually areas of land which peasants used to grow food, rear animals, have festivals, and they were forced from their lands into the industrial cities to be cannon fodder for the new industrial age. Industry required raw products, and a great raw product was wool from sheep, because you don't have to look after it basically. You just shear it, pack it, send it across, and then it's made into raw products. It's made into finished products. Now, the dilemma was that what occurred was that what we found was that people required cheap labour. They required land and they required resources. They needed land, water, cheap labour. Now, as far as these settlers were concerned, there were vast tracts of land, free land. Although Aboriginal people had lived on this land for over 60,000 years, they were considered to be little more than vermin. And what happened is the aristocracy in England sent their more errant sons to Victoria and New South Wales with resources to create vast sheep stations. So what's that got to do with Victoria and the Eureka Rebellion? Well, the fact is, one, by massacring the original inhabitants and forcing them out their lands, and if you think this is an exaggeration, of over 100,000 people living in the area which is now called Victoria, in 1835, within 20 years there were less than 2,000 original inhabitants left. This left the land free for exploitation. Now, this land wasn't exploited by small farmers. It was exploited by squatters who claimed the land as their birthright and used that land to grow sheep. Now, the missing ingredient was cheap labour. Well, labour was plentiful, not because of migration, but because of the many hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands of ticket and leave men and women who required work after they'd finished their sentences as convicts. So we had the perfect triangle. We had land that was free, we had labour that was almost free, and we had the sheep, the raw product, the wool. Now, this went on for almost 20 years. In 1851, Victoria was declared an independent colony from the state of New South Wales. The dilemma was that independent colony, on almost the same day that independence was declared, gold was found. Initially, the finding was hidden. Now, with the establishment of the colony of Victoria, what we saw was the establishment of a legislative council, whose members were, one, appointed by government, and two, represented the 700 squatters who had taken over the land. They were exceptionally concerned about the discovery of gold, because gold is a little bit like Powerball and Tatslotto today. It was a way that ordinary people could make their fortune. As soon as gold was discovered, people who were working for the squatters left their employment and took a punt at finding gold and becoming rich. So in order to stop the flow of cheap labour from the squatters' farms to the burgeoning gold mines across Victoria, the Legislative Council passed legislation to tax the individual miner. And I'll repeat it again, to tax the individual miner. Not tax the gold that came out of the earth, but the individual miner. And they did that to prevent people, or tried to prevent people, from flocking to the goldfields to find their fortune. Now, obviously, it didn't work. And at one stage there were so few government bureaucrats in Melbourne that troops or sailors from two ships that had been sent to Melbourne to maintain order were used to guard the treasury where the gold was stored. That's the treasury, which you can see today in Spring Street. So what happened is, with the introduction of the mining licences, the fact is that, like Tatslotto and Powerball, most people don't win big. So what happened is that there was great concern and agitation in the goldfields regarding the gold licence, which was quite extensive. £2 for a month. Quite extensive. At the same time, the Victorian government set up a gold commissioners who had troops, mounted troops, whose job it was to arrest miners who had not paid the gold licence fee. Now, there were semblance of revolt across Victoria before 3rd of December 1854. There were the Bendigo Red Ribbon movement. There were the Rushworth riots in 1853, which almost led to a massacre of the police that were stationed there to maintain order on the goldfields. There were problems at Clunes and other parts of Victoria where gold had been found. But the diggings in Ballarat were a little bit different, because the diggings in Ballarat were underground diggings, because the alluvial gold had been mined, panned, and had run out. So you had a situation where you had miners who had dug holes in the ground, who were in a position to defend themselves, who were involved in agitation. Now, all agitation is not just about the people involved. It's about the people behind who spread the ideas. And in an era where we only get one interpretation of news, there were 4 independent newspapers in Ballarat for a population of 25,000. The situation got so heated that on the 11th of November 1854, the Ballarat Reform League was formed to represent the interests of the gold miners on the Ballarat gold leads. Now the story goes, and again it's just a story, the story goes they were looking for a symbol, some type of flag, because Ballarat was a tent city, and if you live in a tent city, when you come out of that tent, you need to know where things are. Where's the baker? Where's the toilet? Where's the shopkeeper? And so most of the businesses in Ballarat, in that tent city, had a flag, a symbol, and they wanted a symbol of their rebellion. The story goes that of the 13 people who were formed the initial Ballarat Reform League, that one went out to urinate, and as he looked up in the sky he saw the Southern Cross. Now the Southern Cross may not mean anything to you and me, because we live in the Southern Hemisphere. For men and women who had come from the Northern Hemisphere to find their fortune, the fact is the Southern Cross can only be seen in the Southern Hemisphere. That means when they were lying in their tents at night, they could see the Southern Cross, and that reminded them they were in a new world. And they were keen to create a new world free of the class divisions, the hatreds that existed in the old world, because people flocked to the goldfields from all parts of the world. Now the way the goldfields, the Ballarat Reform League organised, was based on the concept of mass meetings. They discussed the situation. Remember, this is the time before electronics and public address systems. They would come to a conclusion, select delegates, and send those delegates to Melbourne to debate with the government of the day regarding their position. And their position they wanted the abolition of the gold licence. End of story. Now things came to a head in Ballarat when James Scobie, a miner who was walking home from a hotel, was beaten to death. By, it said, the publican Bentley and some of his workers. What happened is there was an inquiry, a coroner's inquiry, which absolved Bentley and his staff of any responsibility of the death of James Scobie. A few days later there was a riot and the hotel was burnt to the ground. So at the Ballarat Reform League there was this huge reasons for revolt, because not only were the police corrupt, that's the Victoria Police, which had been formed in 1853, continuation of the same police force we have today in Victoria, but the actual courts were corrupt. And Governor Hotham, a naval disciplinarian who'd been appointed to try to quell the possibility of revolt on the goldfields, was not the type of person who could actually come to any agreement with the miners. So on the 29th of November 1854 there was a monster meeting at Ballarat. Over 20,000 people attended. Ballarat at that time had a population of around 25,000, that including men, women and children. At the end of the monster meeting, the Eureka flag was raised for the first time. At the end of the monster meeting, a section of the crowd went to Bakery Hill in Ballarat, which still exists today, courtesy of the much maligned Builders Labourers Federation, which put a green ban to stop McDonald's expanding onto that exceptionally important historical site. It still is there as a roundabout, believe it or not. So at that site The tensions within the Ballarat Reform League, which were a tension between those who wanted to use force and direct action, those who wanted to use peaceful action, and those who wanted to use forceful action, were led by a man called Peter Lalor, whose brother had been killed during the Young Irish Revolts in 1848, and Humphrey Bassoon, who wanted a more peaceful resolution to the issue. Now, what happened is that the more radical faction took control of the Ballarat Reform League, and on that afternoon they swore the Eureka Oath. And it's the Eureka Oath which gives us the ability to analyse the Ballarat Reform, the Eureka Rebellion 170 years ago. And the Eureka Oath is, we swear by the Southern Cross to stand truly by each other and fight to defend our rights and liberties. Now, if we dissect this oath, we will come across rediscover the 4 pillars of the Eureka Rebellion. We. That's everybody. Not just white people, Roman Catholics, Protestants, Jews. We. Everybody from every corner of the earth had flocked to Ballarat. What we saw was that on that fateful day, 3rd of December, differences in race, religion, culture, language didn't matter. What mattered is they were all oppressed by the same colonial British colonisers. That's the only thing that mattered to them. We swear by the Southern Cross. And the Southern Cross isn't a religious figure. The Southern Cross basically tells people they are in a new land. They are in a new land. We swear by the Southern Cross to stand truly by each other. That's all about solidarity, and fight to defend our rights and liberties. So the 4 pillars of the Eureka Rebellion can be described as internationalism, not nationalism, not divisions based on superficial differences, but internationalism based on the fact that everybody is under the same oppressor. It's about direct democracy. They didn't use parliamentary democracy as the mechanism via which they made their decisions. They used a pure form of direct democracy. They called public meetings, made decisions, elected delegates, and sent those delegates to debate with the government of the day regarding their demands. And then those delegates came back and reported back to the mass meeting. That's direct democracy. We swear by the Southern Cross to stand truly by each other. Solidarity. Solidarity is the essence of successful struggle. If there is no solidarity, as we see in trade union struggles, there is no success. We swear by the Southern Cross to stand truly by each other and fight to defend our rights and liberties. That's direct action. For the 4 pillars of the Eureka Rebellion are internationalism, direct action, direct democracy, and solidarity. This is what we discover when we actually look at what happened on that day. On the 3rd of December, which was a Sunday, the British authorities, the 12th and the 40th British regiments, plus about 240 men, plus 90 Victorian Mounted Police, at 4 a.m, attacked the Eureka Stockade, the compound which the miners had built, and within 15 minutes, the revolt had been put down. But the fact is, the revolt just started then. It's one of those moments in human history where a defeat is victory. When the compound was overrun, there were only 104 men left in that compound. because none of them expected they would be attacked on the Lord's Day. How wrong they were regarding the British Empire. The day before, over 2,000 well-armed men had been drilling in the same area, waiting for the attack. Over 50 people died on that fateful day. Some in battle, but many were massacred, not by the soldiers of the 12th and 4th Regiment, but they were massacred by the Victoria Mounted Police, who for the next 3 hours, up to 5 kilometres from the camp, from the Eureka Stockade, butchered people, burned down tents, stole their gold. And the Victoria Police Force, which was formed in 1853, has never apologised for that atrocity, one of the major atrocities outside the massacre of this Victoria's Aboriginal people that has occurred in this state. So the aftermath was extraordinary. What had happened is martial law was declared. Over 800 troops under General Nichols were sent to Ballarat to extinguish the rebellion. But what the government found is there were revolts across Victoria. The mass meeting which was called by the Lord Mayor of Melbourne, where over 6,000 attended the next day, the Lord Mayor was removed as the chairperson by the meeting which condoned what had happened. There were rallies in Geelong, in Clunes, in Warrnambool, in Portland, all over Victoria. The government was faced with a huge dilemma. All its troops were in Ballarat. It was facing a potential revolt. It was facing the loss of a colony like the United States of America, almost 80 years previously. And it was fighting its own rearguard battle against nationalist rebels in Canada. So what it did is what it did in Canada. It backed down. And all the demands of the Ballarat Reform League, including universal male suffrage, were accepted. 13 of the 102 that were arrested on that day for high treason were tried, and the trial started in February 1855. And the first man that was tried was John Joseph, a freed slave from New York, who had shot and wounded Captain Wise, who died of his wounds a few weeks later, the deputy commander of the British forces. Everybody expected him to be found guilty and executed. But the people of Melbourne acquitted him. And there are drawings of him being shared through the streets of Melbourne by thousands of, celebrating residents. And every one of the 13, including Raphael Carboni, the leader of the, not the self-appointed, but the elected leader of the non-English speaking rebels, was acquitted. John Sorrison, a Jew, acquitted. Another black American from Kingston, Jamaica, acquitted. 6 Irishmen, including Haynes, acquitted. And by the middle of 1855, the colony of Victoria realised the game was up. They acquiesced. Pardons were given to the rebels. And within 12 months, both Peter Laylaw, the head of the radical faction of the Eureka Rebellion, and Humphrey Bassoon were both elected to the the new Victorian Legislative Assembly. So what's the story? The fact is that little has changed. It's not about gold today. It's about access to resources. Who controls those resources? Who uses those resources? Who profits from those resources? And for a country like Australia, 170 years after the Eureka Rebellion, and almost 230 years after colonisation began, a country like Australia that cannot actually come to some type of understanding and treaty with its First Nations people, that continues to have almost 2 million children living in poverty, that has 1/3 of the population living on inadequate social security benefits, that we see where the majority of the population finds itself in constant debt and needs to work constantly in order to service that debt, to keep a roof over their heads and educate their children. So 170 years later, we have learned very little. I think the important lesson to remember is the 4 pillars that made what seemed an impossible dream into reality for the diggers in Ballarat and Victoria. Internationalism. There's no point fighting amongst each other regarding superficial differences. It's all about who oppresses us. It's about direct action. Parliamentary democracy has its limits. It's about direct action. It's about direct democracy. Parliamentary democracy has been usurped by that small percentage that owns the means of production, distribution, exchange and communication. No wonder we can never solve the problems in this country. Considering we're 26 million people living on a resource-rich continent, you would think that this country should be heaven on earth. And solidarity. So if you find yourself in Ballarat on Tuesday the 3rd of December 2024, I invite you to join us at 4 a.m. at Eureka Park, at the corner of Eureka and Stall Street in Ballarat, to join our dawn ceremony where people from across Australia will come to honour those who died on that spot on that day. This will be followed by a communal breakfast. Please bring food and drinks to share. At 10 a.m. we'll be going to Bakery Hill, where we will be giving out 6 Eureka Australia Day medals to Australians who've made a valuable contribution to the society. One of the Eureka medalists will be Senator Lydia Thorpe, who's agreed to accept that medal. Obviously there will be other medalists which we'll announce on the day. At 12 o'clock we'll move to the old Ballarat Cemetery and go to the mass grave where the diggers are buried to pay our respects. At around 1 o'clock we'll have a lunch at Ballarat Trades Hall in Camp Street. At 3 o'clock I'll be giving a talk at the Eureka Centre in Eureka Park regarding the Southern Cross, the flag which was created, how was it created, why it was created. And at 6 to 10 p.m. we'll be going to the Queen's Head Hotel in Ballarat for the annual Eureka dinner. You're invited to come to any or all of the events. If you can't make it this year, there's always next year. There's always 2025. Put the day in your diary. Why celebrate the King's birthday? Why celebrate a football day? Why celebrate a horse race with a public holiday? We should be having a public holiday on the 3rd of December. Just tell your boss, happy to work on the King's birthday, but you're not happy to work on Eureka Day. See you at Eureka this year, and if not this year, next year.